This episode and others like it are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you like my videos and you're looking for something a bit more fun and longer form, check out the podcast I run with Hakeem and Yugopnik. It's called The Deprogram, and we tackle all sorts of topics, from politics to culture to whatever the current thing is, and generally just have a good time. We recently passed the 1-year mark, so you've got plenty of episodes to binge. You can find The Deprogram on all your favorite platforms. Hey there. This is one of those videos that'll probably reach a bunch of new people, so if you're one of them, welcome to the channel. My name is JT, and I make videos about politics and culture from a socialist perspective. Now, I don't want this to sound like a politician's speech, so this video is going to be pretty direct. Many of the biggest problems in your life are either caused or worsened by capitalism. And the truth is, there are ways to solve these problems. Another world not just radically different, but better, is actually possible. We've only experienced capitalism for a few hundred years at most, so it's not utopian to think the world could change and become a better place, and it's not being bitter or ungrateful to critique it in its present state. It's normal. Things are bad, we know why, and we can fix them. Capitalism has had its time in the sun, and someday it will end. And it should. Just as humanity progressed from feudalism to capitalism, so too will we move on from capitalism to socialism. Our whole purpose, when you really boil it down, is to leave a better future for our children. And handing them down a broken, rapidly imploding capitalism isn't going to achieve that. So let's take a quick look at what's wrong with capitalism and why it's time to accept that we should move on. Over the course of the pandemic, the 10 richest people in the world doubled their wealth, while the income of the bottom 99% of humanity fell. $700 billion shared between just 10 people turned into $1.5 trillion in only 2 years, at a rate of $1.3 billion every single day, or 15 grand per second. In less time than this sentence has taken to read out, they raked in your yearly salary, and together own more than the world's poorest 4 billion people. No one needs this reminder, but the pandemic was, and still is, brutal. In just the first year, millions of people died, and the lives of millions more got a lot harder overnight. Nearly 100 million additional people fell below $1.90 a day during the pandemic. Millions of essential workers were forced back to work while their bosses bet on how many of them would get COVID. And millions of people were laid off without warning and with just 2 miserable checks to stretch out and make last over 2 years. While the vast majority of humanity was suffering through the crisis, being told to go back to work and risk death to save the economy, or generously offered the alternative of starving at home, a handful of people with unfathomable power and privilege profited off the chaos, hoarding the wealth that could have changed the lives of the millions of people they share a planet with. These 10 multi-billionaires made so much money, both before and during the pandemic, that even if they lost 99.99% of their wealth today, they'd still be richer than 99% of all the people on Earth. That's Blade Runner levels of wealth inequality, or Altered Carbon, or Elysium. Take your pick of dystopian movies we all agree show an untenable future, that's what we have. Many of us just don't recognize it without the cyberpunk aesthetic. Instead, this is our aesthetic, which frankly is even more depressing. What the pandemic showed, more clearly than ever before, is that this is not a system that works. A system where the immense wealth of a few people comes from the suffering of everyone else, and by its accumulation, actively prevents them from living a decent life needs to be done away with. And we've known this for a long time. As Albert Einstein wrote in his essay, Why Socialism? Capitalism is trapping us in the predatory phase of development, and preventing us from transitioning into the collaborative phase of human progress. While capitalism has certainly improved many aspects of human life compared to what it used to be like under feudalism, it has done so on the terms of exploitation, coercion by an unaccountable few, and the total destruction of our ecosystems. Capitalism is an improvement, yes, for some, but a deeply contestable one. And we desperately need to get out of it. Because what Einstein could not imagine back when he wrote his case for socialism in 1949 is how much worse and even more predatory capitalism would become in the following 70 years. Nowadays, 45% of all new wealth created goes directly to the top 1% of the population. CEOs of large corporations make over 350 times what their workers do. And all the while, employee wages are lower than they were 50 years ago when you account for inflation. And I don't care how hard they work. No one works 350 times harder than anyone else. But I could almost forgive it if half of all Americans didn't live paycheck to paycheck, or if a $50 trillion transfer of wealth hadn't gone from the bottom 90% of society to the top 1% since 1975. But they do, and it has. And it's not just wages, it's everything else too. 28 million Americans don't get any paid vacation or paid holidays, so they hardly take any time off. And who can blame them? When wages don't even keep up with inflation and most people can't cover a surprise $400 expense, it's simply not possible to take time off. And that's hardly surprising for a country that also has no federal guaranteed paid parental leave whatsoever. It's not just that we're getting paid less, getting a smaller share of the wealth we produce, and enriching a single % of the population despite living in the most productive time in human history. We're working more for less. And on a related note, the gender pay gap makes that even more true for about half the population. Still to this day, women make 84 cents to a man's dollar, and that number only gets worse for women of color. While the reasons for all these statistics are certainly varied, they all find their root or their excess in capitalism and its logic. All of these statistics are perfectly in line with the prime directive of our current economic model: the accumulation of profit for the capitalist class. They are all justified by the fact that in some way they have allowed for a small minority of the population, incredibly powerful and wealthy by virtue of its ownership of the means of production and nothing else, to squeeze more out of their workers for their own benefit. In the last century, we've seen the gradual destruction of unions, a federal tolerance of permanent high unemployment, and a series of successive changes to the tax system that together allow more and more wealth to accumulate at the top with these owners of economic property. Wealth is more concentrated, we're more overworked, and rampant inequality persists because this economic system has no mechanism to fix these problems. On the contrary, it thrives on their existence. What capitalism demands above all else is profit. And in order for the system to be profitable, someone needs to get screwed over, and it certainly won't be those with the executive power to set the rules. Think of it like this. No boss out there, however compassionate and kind-hearted they are, will ever pay their employee an equal or greater amount than they bring to the company. It wouldn't make sense. What would be the point of hiring an extra person if all the money they generate goes right back in their pocket? In other words, no matter what your pay is, even if it seems incredibly generous, it's less than what you're actually worth to the company. And the money taken off the top, your surplus value, isn't going to a company fund or R&D or a collective pension scheme. Nothing that benefits you or your coworkers even indirectly. No, it's going to the shareholders. Otherwise, there'd be no profit, only expenses and income. This is the fundamental truth of capitalism. The employee-employer relationship is always in favor of the employer. Because when it isn't, companies aren't profitable, and that's a big no-no under capitalism. And the rest of the economy is there to facilitate that. A consistent so-called natural unemployment and a minimum wage that hasn't budged in almost 15 years together gives your boss the ability to replace you at any time. It keeps you compliant to their power under threat of poverty. And it gives them leverage to steadily increase that gap between how much money you bring the company and how much you get paid. Okay, for a lot of you that was probably pretty frustrating. I can hear you saying, well, yeah, it sucks, but how else would a business function? It's just common sense it has to be this way or the economy wouldn't work. And that right there is the point. It's not that the economy wouldn't work, it's that a capitalist economy wouldn't work. So what about socialism? Socialists have a different perspective on how to organize society. To summarize, capitalists and capitalism's advocates believe that society is best served by a market-based economy, coupled with a society divided into two classes. One that owns and controls the productive enterprises and seeks profit, and one that does not own this form of property and therefore needs to sell its labor power for a wage. Ultimately, proponents of capitalism believe this leads to the greatest possible good because, in their opinion, markets, even when they're imperfect, are better at making decisions than democracy is. Socialists disagree. We know that markets follow the money, not the collective good. And it's not hard to see how a society with such staggering inequality might interpret that fact. We know there's no such thing as a perfect market or a perfectly rational consumer. We know that given enough time, competition always means monopolies. And we know that even if none of this were true, the whole capitalist system would still be built on a small group of unelected people having more power than the vast majority of the population and using it to enrich themselves. So, what do socialists propose instead? Well, first, let me just take 1 second to clarify a few things we do not propose, because I get these comments every week. We do not call for a state-mandated all-gray wardrobe, or for every person to have exactly the same amount of stuff. That's a very misguided notion of what socialism is about. When we use words like equality, we're not talking about forcing sameness in every regard. We're talking about making sure that everyone is afforded the same baseline standard of living. That's it. It's not a cap. It's a basic guarantee. Individuality, personal expression, the drive to do or become more, none of that will change. That's the best part about being human, and socialists are all about it. Now, let's talk specifics. A guaranteed standard of living. What does that mean? Universally free, or at the very least universally accessible, housing, education, food, water, and healthcare for all. The right to a life of dignity and basic security because those things are well within our means by every measure available. There's too much food going to waste, too many empty houses, too much stuff being destroyed to artificially inflate its cost, and too many people making a profit by hoarding our basic needs. Socialists are tired of people being pushed into grueling, punishing, or demeaning jobs by being threatened with eviction, starvation, or death by disease. Thanks to modern technology, humanity has greater material prosperity than ever before. Why are we so intent on wasting it by keeping it locked away? It's not hard to imagine a world that works on positive incentives instead of negative ones. The knowledge that your livelihood is secure is a way better incentive to try new things than the threat of losing everything. The second thing socialists propose is democratic control over the means of production. Large companies, factories, farms, things like that. Basically, an economy run democratically and not in the search of profit. This can take many forms, be it a centrally planned economy, a network of autonomous communes, maybe some kind of socialist market system even. It's not clear what option or combination of options will work best for different parts of the world. What is clear is that they would all work better. Workplaces could be run either without a boss or with one elected by the workers. And the products of this economy would be geared towards satisfying the needs and wants of society without also having to be profitable. In other words, it's an economy run without that artificial barrier imposed by a privileged group taking a cut off the top. If you're having a hard time imagining what a democratic workplace would look like, just think about your current job. I'll take retail as a common example. I used to work at Best Buy as a camera expert. My job, on paper, was to help customers pick the camera that would best suit their needs. In reality, management just wanted me to upsell people on more expensive gear. To make a long story short, the camera department is kind of detached from Best Buy proper. We technically reported to the respective brands, and we didn't have a brand manager there most of the time. When left to our own devices, the camera department had the lowest rate of product returns in the store by far, because we decided amongst ourselves how best to meet the customer's needs. When corporate started pressing us for higher profits and the GM started forcing us to upsell, the return rate skyrocketed, actual profits shrank, and the department got all kinds of negative reviews. In this scenario, and countless others across the labor landscape, the workers know how best to do their jobs, and meddling from an unelected manager only makes things worse. Democracy in the workplace increases efficiency and morale and reduces waste. It's a no-brainer. Anyway, those are some basic propositions socialists have for how to change the world for the better, but we'll be the first to admit that they have their limitations. For example, some amount of inequality will still exist in this society, almost inevitably, be it in the political, social, or the economic sphere. Things can always be more egalitarian. And there's no doubt that with the proper institutions and societal commitment to egalitarianism, socialism will tend towards that goal. But it won't ever be ideal, only consistently improving. Some people will be more popular, find self-serving exploits, or may still make 5 times as much as someone else. But not only will this be more strongly resisted by a society that is democratic through and through, instead of nominally democratic in politics and hierarchical in the economy, a 5 times difference in compensation is hardly anything compared to the 350 times higher income of an average CEO, or the 1,000,000 times higher income of the world's multi-billionaires we have today. Equality will undoubtedly make massive strides under a socialist system. And this does not come at the cost of freedom. A century of Red Scare rhetoric has welded the word socialism to the idea of unfreedom in most people's minds, but that is not a feature of socialist thought or practice. Socialists only care to abolish one freedom that exists in our current society, which is the freedom to exploit others. Or in other words, the freedom to take it away from someone else. Everything else, all the freedoms that make life worth living, those aren't going anywhere. On the contrary, with the boot of capitalism off your neck, you will be more able to enjoy freedom in every sense of the word. Personal, spiritual, economic, everything. To quote Eugene Debs, one of the most famous American socialists, socialism is merely an extension of the ideal of democracy into the economic field. And socialism is not so much a cut-and-dried program as it is a method by which industry is to be operated. It does not say what it will do or what you shall do, but only that the people, the workers and producers, shall be the master of themselves. And you know what? Things won't be perfect. They never are. Socialism will come with new problems, many of which we've probably never even thought of. But it will also come with a better way to solve them. When we face a problem today, something important like climate change, for example, our solutions not only need to be filtered by what will either be most profitable or, at best, hurt profits the least, but also the actual decisions over what solutions we do adopt are ultimately made by industries kept out of democratic control. Under capitalism, no government, no scientific board, no body of citizens really has the power to step to the fossil fuel industry. Under socialism, under a democratic economy, a climate change level decision may still be incredibly hard to make, but most people care more about still having a planet to live on than making the numbers on the screen go up every year. And this way, they'll actually have the power to make that decision a reality. That is what socialists offer, a more dignified life and the democratization of power. And the only thing it will cost us is giving up on the outdated idea that there is always a profit-driven solution to our problems. There isn't, and we can do better. As one final thought before you go, let me just be as open as I can here. I don't make these videos to win clout online. I'm not trying to trick you with clever rhetoric or even really convince you to see my perspective. I make these videos because I genuinely believe that this is the way forward. It's time. Deep down, we all know something has to change. I could sell out and make a Why I Left the Left video and get handed a multi-million-dollar conservative talk show today. I'd be set for life. My kids would be set for life. But I cannot do that because with every fiber of my being, I believe that socialism is the only way forward for humanity. It is moral. It is just. At this point, it's just common sense. We have the data. We just have a lot of work to do deprogramming ourselves from a century of Red Scare propaganda. Anyway, I hope that maybe some of this video has resonated with you and that you'll start asking questions about socialism yourself. If you do, I've got a bunch of other videos exploring all sorts of topics. We can do this. We can build the world we deserve. You should be a socialist. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that episodes like these are supported by viewers like you. If you like the kind of content I produce and you'd like to help keep the channel afloat, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. I've also got a podcast called The Deprogram, which just hit the 1-year mark. So if you're looking for something new to listen to, give it a shot. It's a lot of fun. We talk about politics, culture, past socialist projects, and generally just vibe for an hour or so each week. The response has been incredible so far, and we're so excited to bring you a new episode every Friday. If you'd like to check out the show or support our work, you can find us on Patreon, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my other content by following the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.